The studio lights glowed with that familiar, artificial warmth, soft professional, almost comforting. It was the kind of lighting designed to make everything look under control, even when chaos was seconds away. Rachel Maddow adjusted her glasses with practiced calm. The crew moved like clockwork, cameras rolled, teleprompters scrolled, producers whispered through headsets. It was a normal night on MSNBC, or so it seemed. But beneath that polished surface, something was off. You could feel it if you looked close enough, the tension in the way the floor manager double-checked Crockett's mic, the slight tremor in Maddow's voice as she rehearsed her first line, the unusual silence from Crockett, who sat still, breathing slowly, her eyes locked forward like a soldier before battle. Everything appeared fine, but the lights were lying. This wasn't just going to be an interview. This was a reckoning. And no one, not the viewers, not the producers, not even Maddow herself, was ready for what was about to happen. For over a decade, Rachel Maddow wasn't just a journalist, she was a fortress. Every night at 9 p.m., millions tuned in, not just for the news, but for her. Her voice, her conviction, her reputation as the intellectual guardian of progressive America. She didn't just report the truth, she packaged it, framed it, and delivered it with surgical precision. Maddow was smart, dangerously smart. Her preparation bordered on obsessive. She came to every interview with stacks of documents, a memory like a steel trap, and the calm composure of a chess master who already knew the next 5 moves. Presidents feared her. Senators respected her. Media rivals envied her. And for most guests sitting across from Rachel Maddow was like walking into a courtroom where the verdict was already written. She asked questions like a prosecutor. She smiled like a strategist. She listened like a judge. And when she challenged you, it wasn't for drama, it was for the kill. People didn't argue with Maddow. They tried to survive her. But tonight the rules would change. Because across from her sat someone who didn't come to survive, she came to fight. Jasmine Crockett didn't rise through political handshakes or party favors. She rose from the trenches, from real fights in real courtrooms for real people. Before Congress, before the viral clips and headlines, there was just her and the law. She was a civil rights attorney from Texas, one of the few willing to take on cases no one else would touch, cases that were too messy, too dangerous, too politically inconvenient. She didn't wear power like a costume. She earned it, every inch of it, in battle. She stood beside families evicted by predatory landlords. She stared down banks that denied black families fair loans. She walked into courthouses where she was the only black woman in the room and still walked out with victories. Not because the system welcomed her, but because she refused to be ignored. Her clients weren't headlines. They were mothers' sons, veterans, single fathers, undocumented workers, people who had been told they didn't matter, people who had stopped believing anyone would fight for them. Until she showed up. Jasmine didn't play politics. She played defense for the defenseless. And eventually that defense turned into offense because she realized something chilling: the courtroom could only fix the damage. But Congress could stop it from happening in the first place. That's why she ran. And that's why on this night she didn't fear Rachel Maddow. She'd already faced something far tougher: America itself. To the average viewer, it looked like just another segment on MSNBC. The backdrop was familiar, sleek, desk-glowing logo, Rachel Maddow's composed expression as she shuffled papers for the camera. The chyron read, Democratic Division A, conversation about strategy. Safe, predictable, controlled. But what no one knew, not even Maddow herself, was that this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was an ambush. Producers had extended the segment to 20 minutes, expecting fireworks. Maddow had a stack of polling data quotes from strategists and sound bites from recent elections, all aimed at one goal: cornering Jasmine Crockett into admitting that progressive policies were political poison. They had rehearsed it. They'd framed it. They believed they were setting up the perfect trap, one that would add another viral clip to Maddow's trophy shelf. And Crockett. She played along. She smiled in pre-interview banter. She thanked the crew. She sat politely under the lights as they clipped her microphone in place. On the surface, she was calm, cooperative, even gracious. But inside, she was loading ammunition, because Crockett had watched this play before. The condescending tone, the data says you're wrong routine, the polished media figures lecturing working-class advocates about electability. She had come prepared, not with spin, not with slogans, with truth. And the moment Maddow opened her mouth, Crockett would spring the trap. There are moments rare and electric when a room changes. Not because of what's said, but because of what's about to happen. That moment hit just before the red light on the main camera blinked on. The air in the studio felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The kind of silence that doesn't calm you, it warns you. Maddow straightened her papers one last time. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She'd done this 1,000 times. But the confidence that usually radiated from her wasn't there. Meanwhile, Crockett sat still, eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, but there was tension in her shoulders, not fear but readiness. Like a boxer bouncing on their toes just before the bell. A stage manager gave the countdown with fingers in the air, 3, 2, 1. The red light came on, but it wasn't just a camera that turned on, it was something deeper. A switch flipped in Crockett, and though no one knew it yet, the power in the room had shifted. This wasn't going to be a fair fight, but then again, real truth never fights fair. And Jasmine Crockett, she didn't come to play fair. She came to win. Rachel Maddow's voice came through smooth as silk, steady as a surgeon's hand. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Thank you for being here tonight, she began with that trademark Maddow calm, the kind that always came just before the blade was drawn. The tone was respectful, but the intent surgical. This was no welcome. It was an opening move, a chess play in full motion. Maddow's eyes didn't blink as she locked in. She already knew where she was steering this. The framing was subtle, polished, perfected over years of television. We've seen growing concern about how progressive messaging might be alienating swing voters, particularly suburban moderates, who often decide elections. Congresswoman, in your view, is the progressive wing, helping or hurting the Democratic Party? There it was, the trap beautifully baited. To the casual viewer, it sounded like a fair question, civil balanced. But Crockett recognized it instantly, a question that wasn't seeking insight but surrender. It was the kind of question designed to force a confession to get a clip. The kind that had unraveled less seasoned guests before. The kind that could turn one misstep into a headline, progressive admits they're hurting the party. Rachel waited, smiling, calm, still holding the knife behind her back. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. No sigh, no defensive shuffle, no awkward laugh like so many before her. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, not in confusion but in calculation. The smile that formed on her face wasn't a nervous twitch. It was the kind of smile you see from a lawyer who's just spotted the flaw in the prosecution's entire case. She leaned forward just enough to close the distance. Rachel, she said, voice calm but loaded. That's an interesting way to frame the question. The control in the room, the flow, the tempo, the framing shifted. Subtly, powerfully. Crockett didn't argue with the assumption. She rejected the foundation of the question entirely, and in doing so, she broke the rules of the game Maddow thought she was playing. Before we talk, polling, Crockett continued, shouldn't we talk about results? It was a rhetorical jab with a lawyer's edge cutting, not the question, but the frame it stood on. Rachel blinked just once, her posture straightening. This wasn't the defensive guess she had planned for. Crockett wasn't here to explain herself. She was here to expose the setup and the rules they no longer applied. Rachel Maddow reached for her favorite weapon, polling data. She flipped to a highlighted chart on her desk and spoke with the confidence of someone who had built a career around citing numbers no one dared to question. According to recent national surveys, she said terms like Medicare for all and defund the police poll poorly among suburban voters, especially in swing states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. It was meant to sound final. Data, after all, doesn't lie, right? But Crockett didn't even glance at the chart. Instead, she locked eyes with Maddow and answered without a pause. Rachel, do those polls talk to the woman in my district choosing between food and her diabetes meds? Maddow opened her mouth, but Crockett didn't give her the chance. Do those surveys reach the father who's working 2 jobs and still sleeping in his car with his son because rent's out of control silence? Or the grandmother whose voting rights got stripped by some quiet law passed at midnight? Now, the silence wasn't technical, it was emotional, because everyone in that studio and millions watching at home knew exactly what Crockett was doing. She wasn't refuting Maddow's data. She was exposing what that data never counted. Real people, real lives, the very voices left out of the narrative because they didn't fit neatly into a pollster's checkbox. And in that moment, numbers meant nothing. But the truth, it roared. Something was changing, not on screen, but behind it. Producers in the control room sat a little straighter, A camera operator glanced off script. Even Maddow's longtime audio technician shifted in his chair, suddenly unsure which mic would need to be turned up next. Crockett wasn't raising her voice, but she was raising the temperature. Rachel Maddow, who'd mastered the art of narrative control, was starting to lose her grip. Her follow-up questions came faster, sharper, not to clarify but to regain control. And the more she tried, the more it slipped through her fingers. Meanwhile, Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She didn't sweat. She just spoke. And with every word, she reclaimed another inch of power in that room, not by force but by presence. The audience watching at home began to feel it too. This wasn't a guest being interviewed. This was a woman flipping the power dynamic live on national television. Rachel Maddow had always been the one with the upper hand. Until tonight. And the most terrifying part for those behind the camera, Crockett wasn't angry. She was calm, unshakably calm. And that calm from someone who wasn't supposed to fight back was the clearest sign yet. This was no longer Maddow's show. The air had shifted. Rachel Maddow leaned forward, trying to recover her footing, flipping to a second page of notes with just a hint of hesitation. Her voice steadied, but it was no longer anchored in control. It was tethered to fear. Fear of losing the script, fear of losing the room. "Congresswoman," she said, "with all due respect, winning in a deep blue district is different than winning statewide. Don't you think it's a bit irresponsible to push policies that polling shows are unpopular?" The word irresponsible hit the air like a slap, and Jasmine Crockett caught it effortlessly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even blink. She leaned in locked eyes with Maddow and dropped the sentence that would echo across the country. "Rachel, when was the last time you had to choose between paying rent and buying insulin?" Boom, 15 words, and the entire room fell silent. The audience didn't just hear it. They felt it, because it wasn't just a question, it was a mirror. A mirror held up to a media figure who made $7 million a year, telling working families their pain was too radical to be politically strategic. Maddow's lips parted, but no words came out. And for the first time in her broadcast career, she looked caught. Not in a trap, but in the truth. You could hear the silence. Not just in the studio, but inside the studio. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. That silence when the truth drops so hard, even sound is afraid to move. Rachel Maddow blinked. Once, slowly. Across the studio, the floor manager's clipboard dipped slightly in his hand. A camera operator instinctively took a half step forward, unsure whether to zoom in or cut to commercial. The assistant producer's fingers hovered above the control panel, frozen. No one spoke. Even the crew professionals trained to stay invisible couldn't help themselves. They looked up, because something real had just happened. Not staged, not debated, not framed for the audience. Real. A woman who had spent her career defending the most vulnerable had just flipped a multi-million-dollar studio into a courtroom of conscience. And the defendant wasn't just Maddow. It was the system she represented. And for a split second, under the weight of that one question, everyone in that studio realized they were no longer watching an interview. They were witnessing a reckoning. Rachel Maddow opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The woman known for monologues that could slice through steel suddenly couldn't form a sentence. She glanced at her notes, then back at Crockett, then down again. Her fingers lightly tapped the edge of her desk like she was trying to summon rhythm structure, anything to bring her back to center. But it was gone. The script couldn't save her. Not this time, because the question Crockett asked, "When was the last time you had to choose between rent and insulin?" wasn't political. It was human. And there was no paragraph, no polling figure, no rehearsed retort that could erase the truth behind it. Maddow cleared her throat. "Congresswoman, I think the issue is complex." She finally said, her voice thinner than usual, hesitant, unsteady, like a tower swaying in the wind. But Crockett didn't interrupt. She didn't smirk. She just watched. Because she knew what was happening. She wasn't winning an argument. She was exposing a fracture. A crack in the polished armor of a media empire built on control, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel Maddow didn't have any. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because silence, the kind that only truth can create, had already cleared the room. Maddow sat frozen, eyes wide, lips parted slightly. She looked like she was still trying to find a path back. A sentence, a soundbite, something, but Crockett gave her none. Instead, she leaned in, voice calm but sharp as a blade. What's irresponsible, she said, is sitting in a multi-million-dollar studio telling working families that fighting for their survival is too radical. Boom! That line clear, devastating truth landed like a detonation. The internet would call it the moment, not because it was loud, not because it was rude, but because it was real. Crockett didn't stop there. What's irresponsible, she continued, is having the luxury to never face the choice between medicine or housing, and still telling the people who do that they're being politically inconvenient. Every word hit like a verdict. The clip, just 15 seconds long, would go viral within minutes. But in that moment, Crockett didn't care about clips. She cared about truth, and truth had never sounded more righteous. By now, the tables weren't just turned, they were flipped. Rachel Maddow, once the unshakable interviewer, sat stiff, her silence growing louder by the second. Her signature calm had cracked, not shattered, but cracked enough for the world to see. And Jasmine Crockett, she didn't just hold the moment, she commanded it. With laser focus, she didn't raise her volume, she raised the stakes. You sit there, she said, eyes locked on Maddow in a $7 million studio, lecturing working families about what's politically acceptable. Her voice didn't waver, because she wasn't asking a question. She was delivering a charge. You've never had to ration your kids' insulin, never had to call 3 jobs just to pay for childcare. And yet somehow you think it's your place to tell those people what's too radical? The studio didn't just go quiet this time. It felt convicted. Rachel blinked, and Crockett leaned in again. You say we need strategy. Strategy is making sure people can live long enough to vote. That line hit like a moral freight train, not just to Maddow, but to every viewer who'd ever felt like the people in charge were more interested in optics than outcomes. And for the first time in years, Maddow looked less like the gatekeeper of liberal media and more like the symbol of what needed to be broken. Maddow finally spoke. Her tone was firmer now, the kind of voice she used when she was in charge. Congresswoman Crockett, I think we both know politics isn't just about passion. It's about building coalitions, compromise, and working through the system. It sounded reasonable, measured, polished, the kind of line that would have worked in any other interview. But this wasn't just another interview, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another guest. She let the silence hang for a beat, then 2, and then with the same deadly calm she'd held all night, she replied, Coalitions, she echoed. You mean the ones that leave working class folks at the bottom every single time Maddow blinked? Crockett didn't wait. You talk about compromise like it's noble, she continued, but compromise is only noble when both sides lose something. Poor people always lose everything. Now the energy shifted again, but not in Maddow's favor. The audience didn't just hear the words, they felt them. And Maddow, she tried to smile, tried to shift back into control. But it didn't work, because in that moment, every attempt to balance the conversation sounded like a plea to protect the status quo. And Crockett wasn't there to protect it. She was there to set it on fire. Maddow tried to bring it back. Her voice steadied like a teacher returning to the lesson. I understand your passion, Congresswoman, but don't you think some of this rhetoric could alienate moderates? We're trying to win hearts, not just make noise. Crockett's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. And what came next wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was raw. Rhetoric, she said quietly. Is it rhetoric when my voters can afford to live? The room held its breath. Is it rhetoric when single mothers are choosing between daycare and dinner? Is it rhetoric when people in my district skip chemo because insulin already drained their bank account? She leaned forward. You sit here and call it language. But for them, it's life or death. Silence. True silence. Maddow didn't interrupt. She couldn't. Because Crockett had just drawn a line not between left and right, but between reality and performance. And suddenly the audience watching at home didn't see a politician on a talk show. They saw someone telling their story in a room where it was never supposed to be heard. It started with a single question, delivered not with malice, but with intention. Rachel Crockett asked calmly, when was the last time you rode the bus to work? Maddow's eyes darted, unsure if this was rhetorical. It wasn't. Do you know how much a gallon of milk costs in South Dallas? Or what a broken AC unit means to a grandmother on oxygen? Now it wasn't just a question, it was cross-examination. The control room stayed silent, no interruptions, no commercial cuts. Because the roles had reversed. The interviewer had become the defendant. And Crockett, she wasn't just holding court. She was prosecuting a system, and Maddow had become its face. You ask us to moderate, to tone it down. But when do you ask lobbyists to step back? When do you demand billionaires compromise? Each question hit like a hammer. You speak of strategy. But whose strategy wins when my constituents are losing their lives? Maddow blinked again. The audience at home didn't. Because now this wasn't about Maddow. It was about every politician, pundit, and polished persona who spoke of pragmatism while millions suffered. And Jasmine Crockett had just flipped the camera on all of them. Before the interview even ended, phones were already out, camera assistants, interns. Even one of the lighting techs. Everyone knew something historic was happening. By the time Crockett leaned back in her chair, voice steady, eyes fierce, the hashtag was already trending. Chad Crockett destroys Maddow. Within minutes it hit number 3, then number 1, then worldwide, and not just political Twitter, Black Twitter, nurse Twitter, single mom Twitter, veteran Twitter. They all showed up and they all had receipts. Clips of the moment Jasmine said, "Is it rhetoric when my voters can't afford to live?" went viral in under 6 minutes. People weren't just sharing, they were shouting. She said what we've been screaming into the void for 10 years. Maddow got demolished by someone who actually gives a damn. I don't know Crockett, but she just earned my vote, my respect, and my full attention. For once, the timeline wasn't full of cynicism or hot takes. It was full of fire, rage, relief, recognition. Because in a world where working people are told to wait their turn, someone finally tore the mic away and said enough. By hour 12, the clip had 10 million views on X. By hour 14, it had a beat drop remix on TikTok. It wasn't just virality, it was velocity. Edits flew across the internet. One spliced Crockett's line, "Is it rhetoric when my voters can afford to live over a Kendrick Lamar instrumental?" Another turned her entire monologue into a gospel sermon, complete with a church organ drop every time she said life or death. Meme pages lit up. Rachel Maddow's face when Crockett leaned in. "Your Honor, I no longer wish to proceed with this witness." Split screen edits. One side Maddow with her signature smirk. Other side Crockett calm and locked in. Caption, "This ain't MSNBC, this is court." The memes weren't mocking. They were reclaiming. For once, people didn't have to imagine what it would look like for someone real to stand their ground on TV. They saw it. And they remixed it, shared it, claimed it, because Crockett didn't just win a debate. She gave voice to every teacher, cashier, vet, and nurse who ever screamed at a flat screen during a polished news segment. Now they weren't yelling at the TV. They were watching one of their own on it. And they weren't just watching, they were celebrating. It started with progressives, activist pages, leftist think tanks, labor unions. They all posted the same clip with 3 words, "Say it louder." Then came the independents, red state single moms, factory workers from Ohio, veterans who didn't care for politics but knew a truth bomb when they saw one. I don't usually watch this stuff, but she's saying what I feel. I may not vote blue, but damn respect. And then something unexpected. Conservative accounts started sharing it too. Not because they agreed with every policy, but because they saw something they hadn't seen in years. Backbone. You don't have to like her party to respect the fire. She came prepared. She came honest. That used to matter. Suddenly, Crockett wasn't just a viral moment. She was a mirror reflecting back the kind of leadership people thought America forgot how to produce. She didn't pander. She didn't pivot. She didn't pause for applause. She stood firm, and millions across every aisle stood up with her. Because in a nation ripped apart by rhetoric, Jasmine Crockett did the unthinkable. She united the country, if only for a few days, on something real. They called it a meltdown. They called it unprofessional. They said she lost composure. But that's not what millions of people heard. What they heard wasn't rage. It was recognition. It was the voice of every parent who had to pick between groceries and gas. Every retiree who worked 50 years only to choose between heat and medicine. Every black woman who walked into a room and had to earn her respect twice before speaking once. What they heard wasn't anger. It was what truth sounds like when it's been silenced for far too long. Crockett didn't scream. She didn't attack. She didn't even raise her voice. She cut through the noise with the kind of clarity that rattles the walls of buildings built to ignore people like her. And that's why it went viral. Not because it was loud, but because it was real. And in a world built on polite lies, truth even whispered hits like thunder. Rachel Maddow returned to air the next night, same blazer, same backdrop, same calm voice, but something was missing. The air around her used to hum with authority. Now it vibrated with tension. She opened the show with a measured monologue, carefully worded, subtly defensive, not mentioning Crockett by name, but everyone knew. "It's important that we create space for tough conversations," she said, "even when passions run high." But viewers weren't buying it. The comment sections didn't light up with admiration, they filled with links to the clip. Again and again, "You got cooked, Rachel. Space for tough conversations." She brought the tough conversation. Behind the scenes, MSNBC staffers whispered, "She's never been rattled like that." That wasn't just a guess, it was a reckoning. And it showed. Maddow didn't stumble on facts. She stumbled on perception. The aura of control, poise, and sharp superiority, it cracked. Because once the public saw her on the defensive, once they saw her retreat behind academic phrases and sterile tone, they realized she's just a person. Not untouchable, not invincible. Just another host, trying to keep the ground from slipping under her chair. It didn't take long. Less than 24 hours after the interview aired, Jasmine Crockett's Act Blue page crashed twice. People weren't just watching her anymore. They were investing in her. $500,000 in the first night, $1.2 million before the second evening news. Over 80% came from first-time donors. Not corporations, not PACs, people. I've never donated to a campaign before, but she's the real deal. That wasn't politics. That was courage. I don't care what party she's in, she's fighting for us. The fundraising tsunami stunned even veteran campaign strategists. Crockett's team issued one sentence: "We hear you, and we're not backing down." Cable pundits scoffed, "It's just a viral moment. It'll pass." But the numbers kept growing, and something deeper was growing too. She became a symbol not just of speaking truth to power, but of finally getting funded for it. For decades, television anchors were treated like royalty. They weren't just journalists. They were arbiters of truth, gatekeepers of perception. They told America what was important, and America listened. But something cracked after Crockett versus Maddow. People didn't just watch the clip. They rewatched it, analyzed it, broke it down frame by frame. Look how Maddow crosses her arms here, defensive. Pause at 12:46, she loses eye contact. That's power slipping. The internet didn't just replay the moment, it deconstructed the myth. What once felt like reverence now looked like performance. What once felt like respect now looked like control. And what once felt like authority now felt like a stage light flickering. MSNBC, CNN, Fox hosts across the spectrum started hearing the same thing from viewers. "We don't trust you like we used to. You're not neutral. You're not above being challenged." And they're not. Because when one woman armed with lived experience and unapologetic fire can rattle an entire network, the age of untouchables ends. Emails poured in. Calls flooded the networks. Sponsors hesitated. For the first time, the gatekeepers of liberal media, the hosts, the producers, the experts who shaped narratives for decades realized they weren't in control anymore. "The audience is calling the shots," whispered a producer. "Every clip they want to see, every conversation they demand." And it wasn't just numbers. It was passion. It was outrage. It was validation. Every story they tried to spin was met with a chorus of, "We saw what happened. We know the truth now." Maddow could write scripts. She could hire strategists. She could try to regain control of the narrative. But the public had already spoken. Crockett didn't just win an interview. She shifted the balance of power. The systems that once dictated what mattered, what was newsworthy, what was politically feasible, all had to pause and listen. Because when millions of people say, "This is real, this is urgent, this matters," even the biggest gatekeepers have to reconsider everything. The world outside that studio wasn't waiting for permission anymore. It had its voice, it had its judgment, it had its justice. And in that moment, the balance of power tipped. Not just in politics, not just in media, but in the very way America understood truth and representation. Crockett's final words in the studio weren't just for Maddow. They weren't just for the cameras. They were for every American who ever felt unseen, unheard, dismissed. "I didn't come to Congress to make you comfortable," she said. "I came to Congress to make change." Those words reverberated far beyond the studio walls. They were a declaration: change is not polite. Change is not convenient. Change doesn't wait for approval. Crockett wasn't seeking applause. She was seeking truth, and in doing so, she reminded America of something long forgotten. Real leaders prioritize people, not optics. Every viewer over 50, every person who had endured injustice, inequality, or neglect, felt it in their bones. They knew she wasn't just speaking for her district. She was speaking for every voice silenced too long, And that phrase, that declaration, became more than a quote. It became a mantra for a generation. Courage is louder than comfort. The clip had gone viral. The hashtags had trended. The memes had been shared, remixed, and celebrated. But this wasn't just social media. This was a seismic shift. Crockett had taken a studio debate and turned it into a movement. Not because she wanted fame, not because she sought approval, but because she stood for the people. Within 48 hours, donations poured in. Grassroots organizations rallied. Other progressive politicians began to speak bolder, push harder, inspired by what they had seen. America was watching, and they were learning courage matters more than optics. Truth matters more than polls. Real leadership doesn't apologize for fighting for what's right. Crockett didn't just expose the cracks in the media elite. She exposed the possibility of change itself. That one voice, one unwavering stance could ripple through politics, culture, and history. And for those watching, it was clear the era of the untouchable media personality, the rigid narrative, the complacent political script was ending. From the viral clip to real-world impact, Crockett had redefined power. Not power over people, not power for fame, power with purpose. And that, in the end, is the legacy she leaves. A lesson that speaking truth, standing firm, and putting people first can change not just a conversation, but an entire political era. By now, the dust had settled. The headlines had tried to frame the narrative. Political analysts wrote their think pieces. Commentators dissected every word, every gesture. But Crockett's message transcended the spin. The real fight, she said in interviews following the viral clip, is not left versus right. It's truth versus manufactured consent. People got it. For the first time in years, Americans across the spectrum paused to think, not argue. Her words weren't about party loyalty. They were about real lives. Every viral clip, every meme, every post wasn't just entertainment. It was an awakening. And slowly but surely, the ripple became a wave: citizens demanding transparency, politicians reconsidering priorities, media realizing that their authority is conditional, earned, not granted. Crockett had done more than win a single debate. She had redefined the rules of engagement for media, politics, and citizens alike. The fight wasn't over, but one thing was clear. Truth once spoken boldly and unapologetically can no longer be contained. The cameras stopped rolling, the lights dimmed, but the story didn't end. Because the fight wasn't just in the studio, it was in every living room, every timeline, every conversation between neighbors, friends, and families. Crockett's words still echoed. Maybe the problem isn't my message. Maybe the problem is forgetting what this fight is actually about. And now the question wasn't for Maddow or for any politician. It was for you. What side of that fight are you on? The side of truth? The side of people whose struggles are real? The side of courage even when it's inconvenient? Or the side of convenience? Of comfort? Of watching history unfold while staying silent? The choice isn't abstract. It isn't distant. It's here, it's now, and it's yours. Because if one woman could ignite a conversation that shook the media, politics, and culture, imagine what millions of voices united could do. The story of Jasmine Crockett teaches us something profound. Courage is contagious, and truth has power. When one person dares to speak boldly for what's right, even against entrenched systems, authority, or popular opinion, they can ignite change that spreads far beyond themselves. In life, this lesson translates directly: don't stay silent when you see injustice. Stand firm in your principles, even if it's uncomfortable. Use your voice to advocate for those who are unheard. Change doesn't always come quietly. It comes from those willing to risk comfort for justice, to speak truth, even when the world expects you to stay silent. Your actions, your voice, your courage, no matter how small, can inspire others and shift the course of your own world. If this story inspired you, imagine what more we can uncover together. Subscribe to our channel now and hit the notification bell. Be part of a community that values truth, courage, and stories that change the world. Don't just watch history, be inspired to make your own.